Hi guys, we are here to read the beginning of Chapter 7 of The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. And there is so much going on in Chapter 7 that we will have to break this into a couple different videos because it is a long chapter. So it starts out filling us in on what's been going on with Gatsby and kind of Daisy now that they're together. It was when curiosity about Gatsby was at its highest that the lights in his house failed to go on one Saturday night, and as obscurely as it had begun, his career as Trimalchio was over. Only gradually did I become aware that the automobiles which turned expectantly into his drive stayed for just a minute and then drove sulkily away. Wondering if he were sick, I went over to find out. An unfamiliar butler with a villainous face squinted at me suspiciously from the open door. "Is Mr. Gatsby sick?" "Nope." After a pause, he added, "Sir," in a dilatory, grudging way. "I hadn't seen him around, and I was rather worried. Tell him Mr. Carroway came over." "Who?" he demanded, rudely. "Carroway." "Carroway. All right, I'll tell him." Abruptly, he slammed the door. My Finn informed me that Gatsby had dismissed every servant in his house a week ago and replaced them with half a dozen others who never went into West Egg Village to be bribed by the tradesmen, but ordered moderate supplies over the telephone. The grocery boy reported that the kitchen looked like a pigsty, and that the general opinion in the village was that the new people weren't servants at all. Next day, Gatsby called me on the phone. "Going away?" I inquired. "No, old sport." "Well, I hear you fired all your servants." "Well, I wanted somebody who wouldn't gossip. Daisy comes over quite often in the afternoons." So, at this point, Gatsby has quit throwing parties. Daisy didn't like them. The goal was to throw the parties so that she would come, that she would be impressed by him. He's got her now. She didn't like the parties, so no more parties. He has also fired all of his servants. He's replaced them with some rather sketchy-looking people, which we find out next in the next sentence or two that they are connected to Meyer Wolfsheim, which was his, quote, business associate that we met earlier in the book, the guy with the human molars for cufflinks, and he was not a dentist. So he says that he does that because he wanted people who wouldn't gossip now that Daisy's coming over in the afternoons quite a bit. So the whole caravansary had fallen in like a card house at the disapproval in her eyes. There's some people Wolfsheim wanted to do something for. They're all brothers and sisters. They used to run a small hotel. I see. He was calling up at Daisy's request. Would I come to lunch at her house tomorrow? Miss Baker would be there. Half an hour later, Daisy herself telephoned and seemed relieved to find that I was coming. Something was up, and yet I couldn't believe that they would choose this occasion for a scene, especially for the rather harrowing scene that Gatsby had outlined in the garden. So remember, the scene in the garden that Nick is referring to is when Gatsby said that basically he wanted to go back to Louisville, like the last 5 years that never happened, and Nick said you can't repeat the past, and Gatsby said, of course you can. That's what Nick's referring to here. The next day was broiling, almost the last, certainly the warmest of the summer. As my train emerged from the tunnel into sunlight, only the hot whistles of the National Biscuit Company broke the simmering hush at noon. The straw seats of the car hovered on the edge of combustion. The woman next to me perspired delicately for a while into her white shirtwaist, and then, as her newspaper dampened under her fingers, lapsed despairingly into deep heat with a desolate cry. Her pocketbook slapped to the floor. "Oh, my," she gasped. I picked it up with a weary bend and handed it back to her, holding it at arm's length and by the extreme tip of the corners to indicate that I had no designs upon it. But everyone nearby, including the woman, suspected me just the same. "Hot," said the conductor to familiar faces. "Some weather. Hot, hot, hot. Is it hot enough for you? Is it hot? Is it?" My commutation ticket came back to me with a dark stain from his hand. That anyone should care in this heat, whose flushed lips he kissed, whose head made damp the pajama pocket over his heart. Through the hall of the Buchanan's house blew a faint wind, carrying the sound of the telephone bell out to Gatsby and me as we waited at the door. "The master's body," roared the butler into the mouthpiece. "I'm sorry, madam, but we can't furnish it. It's far too hot to touch this noon." What he really said was, "Yes, yes, I'll see." So that line's a little bit confusing. It's what Nick imagines he could say. The master's body, the butler roared. It's not what's actually being said. The butler actually said, "Yes, yes, well, I'll see." So, to recap, it's the hottest day of the summer, which implies that it's Labor Day. So the story started around Memorial Day or just after because it was the beginning of summer. Now it's the last day of summer, the hottest day of the year, which would be considered Labor Day. So Nick has taken the train. He is at Tom and Daisy's. Gatsby has shown up at the same time. They didn't come together. Gatsby drove, but they've shown up at the same time. Jordan's supposed to be there. They're going to have lunch. He set down the receiver and came toward us, glistening slightly, to take our stiff straw hats. "Madam expects you in the salon," he cried, needlessly indicating the direction. In this heat, every extra gesture was an affront to the common store of life. The room, shadowed well with awnings, was dark and cool. Daisy and Jordan lay upon an enormous couch, like silver idols weighing down their own white dresses against the singing breeze of the fans. "We can't move," they said together. Jordan's fingers, powdered white over their tan, rested for a moment in mine. "And Mr. Thomas Buchanan, the athlete?" I inquired. Simultaneously, I heard his voice, gruff, muffled, husky, at the hall telephone. Gatsby stood in the center of the crimson carpet and gazed around with fascinated eyes. Daisy watched him and laughed her sweet, exciting laugh. A tiny gust of powder rose from her bosom into the air. "The rumor is," whispered Jordan, "that that's Tom's girl on the telephone." We were silent. The voice in the hall rose high with annoyance. "Very well, then, I won't sell you the car at all. I'm under no obligations to you at all. And as for you bothering me about it at lunchtime, I won't stand that at all." "Holding down the receiver," said Daisy cynically. "No, he's not," I assured her. "It's a bona fide deal. I happen to know about it." Tom flung open the door, blocked out its space for a moment with his thick body, and hurried into the room. "Mr. Gatsby," he put out his broad, flat hand with well-concealed dislike. "I'm glad to see you, sir. Nick." "Make us a cold drink," cried Daisy. As he left the room again, she got up and went over to Gatsby and pulled his face down, kissing him on the mouth. "You know I love you," she murmured. "You forget there's a lady present," said Jordan. Daisy looked around doubtfully. "Will you kiss Nick, too?" "What a low, vulgar girl." "I don't care," cried Daisy, and began to clog on the brick fireplace. Then she remembered the heat and sat down guiltily on the couch, just as a freshly laundered nurse, leading a little girl, came into the room. So, this scene is very much like the scene when Nick met Myrtle for the first time. If you remember, Nick and Tom go into the garage. Myrtle shows up and she sends George, her husband, to go get some chairs. And as soon as he leaves the room, Myrtle's all over Tom. The same thing has just happened here at the Buchanans. Daisy sends Tom to go make them all a drink, and then she's all over Gatsby. So, there was also the phone call. If you are not familiar with old-fashioned telephones, when Daisy says he's holding down the receiver, she means like he's got his finger on the piece that would hang the phone up, and that he's just faking a conversation about a vehicle in order to cover up that it's his mistress. But Nick actually backs Tom in this situation. So now here comes the nurse with a little girl. So this would be like the nanny. "Blessed precious," she crooned, holding out her arms. "Come to your own mother that loves you." Okay, this is Daisy. The child, relinquished by the nurse, rushed across the room and rooted shyly into her mother's dress. The blessed precious! Did mother get powder on your old yellowy hair? Stand up now and say howdy-do. Gatsby and I in turn leaned down and took the small, reluctant hand. Afterward, he kept looking at the child with surprise. I don't think he had ever really believed in its existence before. I got dressed before luncheon, said the child, turning eagerly to Daisy. That's because your mother wanted to show you off. Her face bent into the single wrinkle of the small white neck. You dream, you absolute little dream. Yes, admitted the child calmly. Aunt Jordan's got on a white dress, too. How do you like your mother's friends? Daisy turned her around so that she faced Gatsby. Do you think they're pretty? Where's Daddy? She doesn't look like her father, explained Daisy. She looks like me. She's got my hair and shape of the face. Daisy sat back upon the couch. The nurse took a step forward and held out her hand. Come, Pammy. Goodbye, sweetheart. With a reluctant backward glance, the well-disciplined child held to her nurse's hand and was pulled out the door, just as Tom came back, preceding 4 gin rickeys that clicked full of ice. Okay, so Gatsby seems stunned. He keeps looking at the kid like he can't believe she's real. Daisy's almost uninterested. She wanted to show the girl off, but then she sends her away, basically. She's like, oh, I love you, bye. And off the child goes. She didn't even spend 2 minutes with her, really. And so we see that this, sorry, lost my train of thought there for a minute. The fact that the child exists creates a problem for Gatsby's plan. Remember, he wants to pretend like the last 5 years never happened, like they didn't exist, like her marriage to Tom wasn't a thing. With a child in the mix, it's kind of hard to pretend it didn't happen. Gatsby took up his drink. They certainly look cool, he said, with visible tension. We drank in long, greedy swallows. I read somewhere that the sun's getting hotter every year, said Tom genially. It seems that pretty soon the Earth's going to fall into the sun. Or, wait a minute, it's just the opposite. The sun's getting colder every year. Come outside, he suggested to Gatsby. I'd like you to have a look at the place. I went with them out to the veranda. On the green sound, stagnant in the heat, one small sail crawled slowly toward the fresher sea. Gatsby's eyes followed it momentarily. He raised his hand and pointed across the bay. I'm right across from you. So you are. Our eyes lifted over the rose beds and the hot lawn and the weedy refuse of the dog days along shore. Slowly the white wings of the boat moved against the blue, cool limit of the sky. Ahead lay the scalloped ocean and the abounding blessed isles. There's sport for you, said Tom, nodding. I'd like to be out there with him for about an hour. We had luncheon in the dining room, darkened, too, against the heat, and drank down nervous gaiety with the cold ale. What'll we do with ourselves this afternoon? Cried Daisy, and the day after that, and the next 30 years. Don't be morbid, Jordan said. Life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall. Okay, so there's a lot of symbolism in this book, partly with seasons. That's only a small part of it. So Jordan mentions that everything starts over fresh in the fall, which is kind of weird because usually we think of fall when things die, but she does get the part about things being cool and crisp. So they feel kind of fresh, I guess. But it's so hot, insisted Daisy, on the verge of tears, and everything's so confused. Let's all go to town. Her voice struggled on through the heat, beating against it, molding its senselessness into forms. I've heard of making a garage out of a stable, Tom was saying to Gatsby. But I'm the first man who ever made a stable out of a garage. Who wants to go to town? Demanded Daisy, insistently. Gatsby's eyes floated toward her. Ah, she cried, you look so cool. Their eyes met, and they stared together at each other, alone in space. With an effort, she glanced down at the table. You always look so cool, she repeated. She had told him that she loved him, and Tom Buchanan saw. He was astounded. His mouth opened a little, and he looked at Gatsby and then back at Daisy as if he had just recognized her as someone he knew a long time ago. You resemble the advertisement of the man, she went on innocently. You know, the advertisement of the man. All right, broke in Tom quickly. I'm perfectly willing to go to town. Come on, we're all going to town. He got up, his eyes still flashing between Gatsby and his wife. No one moved. Okay, so Tom comes in, and we have this kind of awkward afternoon party that starts off. Gatsby and Daisy share this look, and it says Daisy told Gatsby that she loved him. She didn't actually say it. She's not over there mouthing the words. That's not what's happening. It's just the way that their eyes connect. Tom sees it, so now he knows. He can't believe it. He looks from one to the other. He's shocked. Daisy has suggested that they go to the city out of frustration or shock. I don't know, but Tom is noticeably irritable at this discovery. So he says, yeah, let's go to town. Maybe he's trying to get Gatsby out of his house. I don't know, but he says, let's do it. Let's get out of here. He's just trying to break up the moment somehow. Come on, his temper cracked a little. What's the matter anyhow? If we're going to town, let's start. His hand, trembling with his effort at self-control, bore to his lips the last of his glass of ale. Daisy's voice got us to our feet and out on the blazing gravel drive. Are we just going to go? She objected. Like this? Aren't we going to let anyone smoke a cigarette first? Everybody smoked all through lunch. Oh, let's have fun, she begged him. It's too hot to fuss. He didn't answer. Have it your own way, she said. Come on, Jordan. Now, have it your way. She's the one who wanted to go. They went upstairs to get ready, while we three men stood there shuffling the hot pebbles with our feet. A silver curve of the moon hovered already in the western sky. Gatsby started to speak, changed his mind, but not before Tom wheeled and faced him expectantly. Pardon me? Have you got your stables here? Asked Gatsby with an effort. About a quarter of a mile down the road. Oh, a pause. I don't see the idea of going to town, broke out Tom savagely. Women get these notions in their heads. Shall we take anything to drink? Called Daisy from an upper window. I'll get some whiskey, answered Tom. He went inside. Gatsby turned to me rigidly. I can't say anything in his house, old sport. She's got an indiscreet voice, I remarked. It's full of... I hesitated. Okay, indiscreet meaning it's not good at hiding things. Her voice is full of money, he said suddenly. That was it. I'd never understood it before. It was full of money. That was the inexhaustible charm that rose and fell in it, the jingle of it, the simple song of it. High in a white palace, the king's daughter, the golden girl. So, at this point, we finally find out what is just so special about Daisy's voice. Nick has talked about her voice several times in the book. Gatsby says it's full of money. And Nick says, you know what, that's it. That's why people listen to her. That's what people want to hear. That's why they pay attention to her. Now, perhaps Gatsby is revealing some symbolism here that Fitzgerald wanted his reader to pick up on. Maybe the idea that people listen to those with money, or people like people with money, which isn't necessarily a good value, but doesn't mean it's any less true. Tom came out of the house, wrapping a quart bottle in a towel, followed by Daisy and Jordan wearing small, tight hats of metallic cloth and carrying light capes over their arms. Shall we all go in my car? Suggested Gatsby. He felt the hot green leather of the seat. I ought to have left it in the shade. Is it standard shift? Demanded Tom. Yes. Well, you take my coupe and let me drive your car to town. The suggestion was distasteful to Gatsby. I don't think there's much gas, he objected. Plenty of gas, said Tom boisterously. He looked at the gauge. And if it runs out, I can stop at a drugstore. You can buy anything at a drugstore nowadays. A pause followed this apparently pointless remark. Daisy looked at Tom, frowning, and an indefinable expression at once definitely unfamiliar and vaguely recognizable, as if I had only heard it described in words, passed over Gatsby's face. Come on, Daisy, said... Sorry. Come on, Daisy, said Tom, pressing her with his hand toward Gatsby's car. I'll take you in this circus wagon. He opened the door, but she moved out from the circle of his arm. You take Nick and Jordan. We'll follow you in the coupe. She walked close to Gatsby, touching his coat with her hand. Jordan and Tom and I got into the front seat of Gatsby's car. Tom pushed the unfamiliar gears tentatively, and we shot off into the oppressive heat, leaving them out of sight behind. So, I have no idea why Tom suggests that he and Gatsby trade cars. Unless it's like a power move, like here, you drive my car, you see what a really nice car is. I don't know. I don't understand that part. But that's what he suggests. He wants to trade cars. He says, come on, Daisy, I'll take you in Gatsby's circus wagon. Daisy brazenly says, she slips out of Tom's arm, like he's got his arm around her, and she says, you know what? I'll go with Gatsby. You take Nick and Jordan. So that is the arrangement. She's going to ride with Gatsby in Tom's car, which is a coupe. And Nick and Jordan ride with Tom in Gatsby's car. Now, this is the big, flashy, yellow car that he picked Nick up for lunch earlier in the book. That was, so fancy. Convertible. So that's the driving situation. Did you see that? Demanded Tom. See what? He looked at me keenly, realizing that Jordan and I must have known all along. You think I'm pretty dumb, don't you? He suggested. Perhaps I am, but I have almost a second sight sometimes that tells me what to do. Maybe you don't believe that, but science, he paused. The immediate contingency overtook him, pulled him back from the edge of the theoretical abyss. I've made a small investigation of this fellow, he continued. I could have gone deeper if I'd known. Do you mean you've been to a medium? Inquired Jordan humorously. A medium isn't like a fortune teller. So Tom realizes that Nick and Jordan already knew about Daisy and Gatsby, and he's like, oh, you think I'm pretty dumb? He's not very happy that he was the only one who didn't know. So did you go to a medium? What? Confused, he stared at us as we laughed. A medium? About Gatsby. About Gatsby? No, I haven't. I said I'd been making a small investigation of his past. And you found he was an Oxford man? Said Jordan, helpfully. An Oxford man? He was incredulous. Like hell he is. He wears a pink suit. Nevertheless, he's an Oxford man. Oxford, New Mexico, snorted Tom contemptuously, or something like that. Listen, Tom, if you're such a snob, why did you invite him to lunch? Demanded Jordan crossly. Daisy invited him. She knew him before we were married. God knows where. We were all irritable now with the fading ale, and aware of it, we drove for a while in silence. Then, as Dr. T.J. Eckelberg's faded eyes came into sight down the road, I remembered Gatsby's caution about gasoline. We've got enough to get us to town, said Tom. But there's a garage right here, objected Jordan. I don't want to get stalled in this baking heat. Tom threw on both brakes impatiently, and we slid to an abrupt, dusty stop under Wilson's sign. After a moment, the proprietor emerged from the interior of his establishment and gazed hollow-eyed at the car. Let's have some gas, cried Tom, roughly. What do you think we stopped for, to admire the view? I'm sick, said Wilson, without moving. I've been sick all day. What's the matter? I'm all run down. Well, shall I help myself? Tom demanded. You sounded well enough on the phone. With an effort, Wilson left the shade and support of the doorway, and breathing hard, unscrewed the cap of the tank. In the sunlight, His face was green. "I didn't mean to interrupt your lunch," he said, "but I need money pretty bad, and I was wondering what you were going to do with your old car." "How you like this one?" inquired Tom. "I bought it last week." "Well, it's a nice yellow one," said Wilson as he strained at the handle. "Like to buy it?" "Big chance," Wilson smiled faintly. "No, but I could make some money on the other." "What do you want money for all of a sudden?" "I've been here too long. I want to get away. My wife and I want to go west." "Your wife does?" exclaimed Tom, startled. "She's been talking about it for 10 years. He rested for a moment against the pump, shading his eyes, and now she's going whether she wants to or not. I'm going to get her away." The coupe flashed by us with a flurry of dust and the flash of a waving hand. "What do I owe you?" demanded Tom, harshly. "I just got wised up to something funny the last 2 days," remarked Wilson. "That's why I want to get away. That's why I've been bothering you about that car." "What do I owe you?" $1.20. The relentless beating heat was beginning to confuse me, and I had a bad moment there before I realized that so far his suspicions hadn't alighted on Tom. He had discovered that Myrtle had some sort of life apart from him in another world, and the shock had made him physically sick. I stared at him and then at Tom, who had made a parallel discovery less than an hour before, and it occurred to me that there was no difference between men, in intelligence or race, so profound as the difference between the sick and the well. Wilson was so sick that he looked guilty, unforgivably guilty, as if he had just got some poor girl with child. "I'll let you have that car," said Tom. "I'll send it over tomorrow afternoon." That locality was always vaguely disquieting, even in the broad glare of afternoon, and now I turned my head as though I had been warned of something behind. Over the ash heaps, the giant eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg kept their vigil, but I perceived after a moment that other eyes were regarding us with peculiar intensity from less than 20 feet away. In one of the windows, over the garage, the curtains had been moved aside a little, and Myrtle Wilson was peering down at the car. So engrossed was she that she had no consciousness of being observed, and one emotion after another crept into her face, like objects into a slowly developing picture. Her expression was curiously familiar. It was an expression I had often seen on women's faces, but on Myrtle Wilson's face it seemed purposeless and inexplicable, until I realized that her eyes, wide with jealous terror, were fixed not on Tom, but on Jordan Baker, whom she took to be his wife. Okay, so let's play catch up. Tom has stopped for gas at Wilson's garage, right? George Wilson. And we find out that Wilson's sick. He says he's been sick. Nick says he looks green. He's so sick. Basically, we learned that Wilson's discovered Myrtle's having an affair. There's something going on. He doesn't know the identity of the lover. He doesn't know that it's Tom. He doesn't know it has anything to do with Tom. But he's discovered it, and so he says that he's going to take her away from there. They're going to move. They're going out west, whether she wants to go or not. So we have Dr. T.J. Eckelberg, who is watching all of this. Remember, he represents kind of like symbol for the eyes of God, the idea that he's watching everything. Nick perceives that Tom and Wilson are really in the same situation. Wilson recently found out that his wife was having an affair. Tom just found out that his wife is having an affair, but they're handling it completely different. Wilson feels so bad, he looks guilty, like he blames himself. Tom, on the other hand, is angry. He can't believe this has happened. He doesn't show any sort of emotion like he feels bad or he's sorry or he's upset. He's just angry. And this shows a lot in their characterization. We also see Myrtle up in the window, and she has spotted them in the car. She's never seen Daisy. Daisy and Myrtle do not know each other. While Daisy knows that Tom's had an affair, she does not know who it's with, and she wouldn't Like they don't know each other, bottom line. So when she sees Jordan sitting in the seat right between Nick and Tom, she assumes that Jordan is Tom's wife. She assumes that Jordan is Daisy, and she has this look of jealous terror as they are pulling away in the car. That is actually where we're going to stop this first part, because it is, like I said, a very long chapter. So come back for part 2, and we will find out what happens when they all get to the city.